G'day Dons fans and welcome to what in all likelihood is the last episode of Don the Stat for 2025. I'm Jonathan Walsh and I'm joined in the studio by my brother-in-arms, partner in crime and co-host Ian Hume. Humey, how's things, mate?
Hey there, Jono. Good to be back. It feels like quite a long time since we've actually done this show. They're here just winding down until Christmas. Tomorrow's my last day at work before the big summer teacher break, so going to make the most of it. Got a bumper show for everyone tonight. We're going to go through the recent draft acquisitions. We're going to review where the list is at and give some predictions for 2026. I think we're over 20 pages on the run sheet, which is probably a record for us at Don the Stats. Strap yourselves in for quite a long night. How are you doing, Jono?
Yeah, I think we're going to earn our break by the end of this one. I'm going well, mate. Like you, I finish work for the year tomorrow. Got a nice little sort of, not quite teacher break, but I've got, 3 or so weeks off. So looking forward to that time with family and friends and, enjoying some cricket as well.
Well, I wish the English were putting up a little bit more of a fight. I know everyone likes to see us beat the Poms, but you kind of want the series you wouldn't mind the series going to distance for once, but, they've talked themselves up and they've fallen flat on their face. It couldn't happen to a nicer bunch of blokes, really, could it?
No, I work for a UK headquartered company, mate, so I take particular pleasure in watching the English suffer.
Look, it's actually been a few months since we acknowledged new patrons, and I've actually got quite a list to go through here before we get into tonight's show. We do like to acknowledge the people who do sign up for the first time. So big thanks to those who've signed up in the past couple of months. Mick, Jaden Tregear, Nathan Lancel, E. Gerard, David Caldwell, Jan White, Steph Seymour, Braden McCormack, Adam Ludbrook, Andrew Pritchard, Sam Sofianos, Matt, Wayne Kerno, James H., Jacob Allen, Jason Durnham, Heath Lamaro, Ange, Will, Jakey Springer, Richard Green, Chris Ramsey, Ruhi Sadwani, and John FK. Look, even in the off-season, the sign-up's still coming. I keep seeing names pop up as having signed up, and it's off-season. I still can't quite picture my head around that people are still giving support at this time, but we thank you all so much for giving us your hard-earned.
Yeah, that's quite a list, mate. We say this a lot, but we do mean it is a really special community. So thank you to everyone who has joined, obviously, recently, in recent weeks and months, but all throughout 2025 and also those that have been with us since the start. It's been a hell of a lot of fun, and one promise that we continue to make is that we'll never take people giving up their hard-earned for granted. So thanks to each and every one of you who continues to play a role in on the stat and what we put together. Yeah, it's been lots of fun throughout 2025. So thank you to everyone. Payments, just worth noting, will stay paused throughout December and January, but you can continue to sign up. So if you do want to be part of it or even just check it out before the new year, you can do so. You'll get access to all the content that's already there and join the very active chat community, which, unlike social media, is a troll-free zone. So it's a safe place to share your view and chat with lots of like-minded and passionate Bombers fans. Yeah, well, shall we get stuck into the show, mate?
Look, let's do that. We have a little bit of news in the last 24 hours before we do get into our review of the draft. Welsh and O'Sullivan were returned quite comfortably at the board election, so a fair bit of stability there. But we also had the announcement this morning that Craig Vozzo will be departing the club upon the completion of his 3-year contract, with him wanting to be back with family in Adelaide, the driving factor behind his decision. And look, you can completely understand where he's coming from his end. He's put in a lot of time, and being away from your family would be quite difficult. So I think we all understand his decision there and accept that and wish him well. But he'll certainly be a big loss to the club. In his 3 years, he's seen the complete overhaul of all aspects of the football department. He's hopefully modernised all the functions and has really set us on the path to become successful. And look, if we are successful in the next few seasons, a lot of it is going to come down to the work he has done over these past 3 years. There were hints that this might happen a couple of months back. There were some stories around Vozzo potentially looking at the Port Adelaide job to be closer to home. So I think the club's probably had a decent idea for a time that this was a possibility. So hopefully they have been starting to think about potential replacements, whether internally or externally. But it is going to be really big shoes to fill based on what Craig has done and the way Craig has carried himself. So big thank you to Craig for the work he's done, and really a really big role to fill in the next couple of months to make sure that the club continues on what we consider to be the right track.
Yeah, look, I think just quickly on the board election results, the Welsh and O'Sullivan retained their positions in a landslide, really. They got the overwhelming majority of votes, which was probably the way most predicted would go, particularly Andrew Welsh stepping into the presidency role. I don't think anyone foresee that he was in any danger of not retaining his position. It does mean that there's now one board-filled position remaining vacant. So I guess they'll, now that they know the makeup of the board in terms of the member voted positions, they'll now make a decision on how they want to fill that role. Regarding CEO and Craig Vozzo, look, it's completely understandable, isn't it, to be away from your family for that long is yeah, I'd imagine really tough, and it should, family should always come first, and Craig's made a decision that put his family at the forefront. I think from a club perspective, it's certainly a blow. I think along with Dave Barham and Andrew Welsh, he's done a lot of the dirty work that had to be done to sort of, clean the decks, wipe the slate clean and build the foundations of what a successful football club needs to operate like. So, I think that will absolutely allow the club to move forward. It would have been great for him to come out at the other end of that and be there for the success that I'm, becoming increasingly confident will follow. But yeah, I think as we both said, we can both understand that you need to make a decision that's right for the family. I think, thankfully, due to that work that's been done and the stability and the unity that is there, and that we probably haven't had in the past, and that includes the work that Craig himself has done, I think we're in a much better position now to handle a disruption like this and keep moving forward than maybe we would have in the past. I think there's a couple of strong internal candidates in Nick Ryan, the Chief Operating Officer, who's now in his second stint as interim CEO, along with Chief Strategy Officer Mark Bolton, who, of course, also brings that element of being a former AFL player to it as well. And I guess there has been a bit of a swing to sort of football first CEOs rather than corporate first CEOs across the competition. You only need to look at the decision of the guys that play out at Princess Park. They've got an ex-footballer in role now. Matthew Pavlich has replaced Tom Harley at the Sydney Swans. So yeah, I think there's a bit of a pathway there for ex-players now. But I would imagine, you sort of hinted on it, that this probably wasn't a decision that came as a surprise to the board as maybe it did to fans, and we would have been canvassing the market prior to the formal decision being made yesterday ahead of the AGM.
Yeah. Well, look, it as we said at the start, it's been a while since we podcasted, and we haven't yet gone in depth in Essendon's 2025 draft and how we went there. We did do a full review of the first night for our patrons, but with the hindsight of time and seeing how some of these players have started to integrate themselves amongst training, we've got a few more thoughts there. So we're probably going to get stuck into that. But, just reflecting back on what that took place almost a month ago, I think everyone's still quite on a high after what appears to be quite a successful national draft. We came off all the drama of the trade period involving Zach Merritt. So it's really great to have almost universally positive talk around the actions of the Essendon Football Club through that draft period. And look, he's hoping that continues into the new year. And look, all the reports we've been getting from training are pretty positive about the new players as well, which really adds to the excitement.
Yeah, it does. I think probably for the first time we've seen a suite of draftees where we can see where they fit, don't we? Like they all bring attributes that we've been crying out for, and as we've heard them speak and give interviews and do those kinds of things, we start to see the qualities of the young men that they are really start to shine. And I think that's as exciting as their football skills and capabilities as well. We've sort of been thinking back on, my own personal excitement about the young group that we put together, and how does that rank against how I felt about some of the young groups that we've had in the past. And I really can't think with one. I think in instinct, your mind goes back to what happened in 1993, but I'm not sure we really knew what we had there in terms of the quality of the talent. And look, I'm not projecting that we're going to have a 1993 season in 2026. I just don't think that happens in the game anymore. That's something that won't be seen again. But I do feel that, at least my personal view, is that this is the best group of, in terms of quantity of it, of young talent we've assembled in, a long time. I won't put a year on it, but yeah, in a long time. And yeah, I think if you add the 5 that we've just drafted to those that we've added over the last couple of years, I think it's pretty exciting to see and think about what we might be able to do in the years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even leading up to that draft night, there was clearly a lot of work done to get higher up the draft order. And a lot of that had its origins in the work done in the previous couple of drafts in terms of moving picks into future years. And you did a great breakdown of that on the Donstat website in an article, sort of going through the process of how the Matt Rosa period has seen us acquire quite a lot of picks that's enabled us to bring in quite a large quantity of talent in one go. Now, there's continual talk that potentially we were looking to get up the order to the Eagles and the Tigers picks, but other than some vague hints, nothing really concrete emerged from that. And I think as the draft approached, it became less and less likely that anyone would give up what the Eagles or Tigers would have asked for in terms to get up those top end picks. I think we all sort of assumed that we were going to be able to trade our picks in the 20s for one of those picks in the mid-teens. I think we were looking at the Gold Coast originally, but I think we sort of owe West Coast a bit of a beer because with their talk of bidding on Harry Dean becoming much more of a reality, that really forced Carlton's hand that they had to move on the two high-end picks that they had. And so it came out earlier, just prior to the draft, that we were firming to get Carlton's pick 9, which I didn't see at the time as a possibility until it emerged. But having those 3 picks in sort of between 21 and 30 really allowed us to have a front row seat to get that pick 9. We eventually did that. And, what we've managed to do is, as much as some people criticised us for trading out of the top end of last year's draft, we've managed to turn that trade into maintaining a top pick in Isaac Kako, bringing a lot of back-end talent from what was a deep draft in 2024's draft. And that's also given us the flexibility to get 3 top-end picks from this draft. So, you can't say yet whether it's a successful tactic because we don't know how these players are going to turn out. But on the surface, it seems like a real masterclass in making a lot with a little.
Yeah, I actually sort of counter your argument there a little bit, man. I think you can say it's a successful tactic because it's ultimately given us access to parts of the draft that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Whether it's successful talent identification, recruiting, and then development, that's what we will need a few years to judge. But in terms of, the Vozzo and Rosa strategy that they laid out was to really load up on the draft ahead of Tasmania coming into the competition and getting as many top end picks as we could. And I think for us, we saw last year as the top end being the first 2 rounds of the draft because it was a bit more of an even, deeper draft. And this year, getting into the first sort of, the really deep inside the top 20 as much as we could where the top end talent is at. So, yeah, I think that first objective, lots of work still to do around, as I said, development and everything that comes. But that first objective of getting access and bringing in high-grade talent to our footy club through the draft, I think we've certainly ticked that off. I think the other variable too in this was Sam Draper taking a free agency offer. That compensation pick we got from Sam as part of the package that got us up the draft. So, the wash-up effectively was Sam Draper, our second round pick, so our natural second round selection, and the second round pick that we got on draft night 2024 from St Kilda. So that was the pick that we were set to take Reece Unwin with that pick. St Kilda called, wanted access to get back into the draft, gave up a future second, which we said yes. We then ended up getting Reece Unwin with our second pick. So we got the player we wanted anyway, and we were able to use that, with our next pick. Got the player we wanted anyway. And then we were able to use that future second to bundle up with those other 2 picks to ultimately get us the picks that got us Dyson Sharp at pick 13 and Max Arness. I'm going to struggle to say that for the first 6 to 12 months, I think, at pick 36. So some really good work by Matt Rosa and his team to put us in a position to get access to that talent.
Yeah, indeed. There was a cost to that, though, and the trade did sort of mean we were running a big risk that we wouldn't be able to match Adam Suede when a bid came at the expected point. And as the draft approached, it really became clear that Fremantle were quite interested with him in what ended up being pick 25, and that's how it played out with them bidding, and Essendon ultimately deciding not to match. It's pretty bittersweet, given that for pretty much all of this year, we had all penciled Adam onto our list, or even written in pen. But essentially, we prioritised getting that Carlton pick 9 over being able to realistically match a Suede bid. And if we ended up matching that Suede bid at 25 with what we had left, that would have meant no Kondogiannis. It would have made it and would have impacted our future pick as well. It's too early to tell whether that is the right call, but on the surface of it, pick 9 is a much bigger chance of being a star than pick 25. So on the balance of probabilities, you'd suggest we made the right call at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple variables here too, mate. Fremantle used the last pick in the first round to draft or bid, but then ultimately draft Adam. And that meant we would have copped a points deficit in the first round of the 2026 draft because we didn't have the picks points set with what we had left to match. And that, in all probability would have meant that our first pick next year would have slid back 2 or 3 spots in the draft. which wouldn't have been an ideal situation. Had the bid come later in the second round, so it really only needed to come one pick later. We then would have carried a points deficit in the second round next year instead of the first round. We might have felt differently about matching. I think the other variable, which you touched on, is who were the players that were still on the board and how did we rate them? Because I think as exciting as it is to bring, young players, onto your list from your own next generation academy, you don't want to cut off your nose to spite your face. And there were certainly players there that we valued, higher than Adam. And ultimately that would have guided our decision. But let's just hope that. And one thing I really liked about Matt Rosa actually was the class in which he spoke about Adam. And let's hope that he has a great career. We know that our NGA and our development program played a role in that. And at the same time, the players that we picked up have great careers at Essendon, and it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, indeed. Well, look, let's start getting on to Essendon's actual picks. And as much as we owe West Coast a beer for forcing Carlton's hand, we probably can send another one the Tigers' way, because we were really at the mercy of what they did with their two selections. I think from pretty far out, it was clear that the Eagles were going to take Dersma and Duff Tytler, and really what would happen for Essendon would depend on what the Tigers would do. And Sam Cumming had firmed as one of their selections, but the next pick was pretty open. They were pretty good at keeping people guessing, and I think that's a tactic to try and encourage teams to trade up, to try and overpay to get that pick, to get a player that they want, whereas the Tigers feel like they could have got the player that they wanted anyway. Teams held firm on that. And I know people were probably expecting them to take one of Robey or Taylor, and was surprised that the player that people suspected up until a month before the draft they were going to take in Sam Grill, but that sort of died away, that they did actually take him. And that decision by the Tigers really opened up a heap of possibilities for us.
Yeah, I think firstly, mate, we should be buying beers for anyone that makes Carlton's life more difficult, regardless of what it means for us. But, in this case, you're right. They're the two decisions that effectively set up our draft. My own wish list was for one of Cumming or Robey, and then Sharp and Farrow with the next two picks, and Richmond taking Grill, a player I don't think we had any real interest in. It really did help open up the possibilities for us. I think Sam Cumming was off the board, of course. I actually did have a look back through our old run sheets. It was back in early August where we put him as our number one target for us. So, and I think he was a player that the club valued and thought of really highly as well. But, that aside, with only Melbourne selecting between our second and third picks, the Grill decision really was a game changer for us, because it meant the likelihood of us being able to get the players we were targeting was really, really high from there on in.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for Essendon fans, the player that most of them were really excited about was suddenly free. And I think, probably the last week or two before the draft, I think we'd all believed that he was going to be off the board before we got a chance to take him. But with Sullivan Robey still available after Richmond's picks, Essendon gleefully claimed him with what had become pick 9 after all the bidding. He's the biggest draft bolter in a decade. He didn't play in the national champs, but it was his performance at the back end of the Coates League that really rocketed him into the top pick contention. I saw people having him rated as high as the second open pick in the draft, and someone West Coast should be really looking at. So, from a talent perspective, I think we've got a real find here. He's 192 centimetres. It sounds like he's probably, in line to grow a couple of centimetres more. And if you see him, he looks like a 25-year-old with the amount of muscle he's got on him. Obviously, his lack of exposure at the top level of 18-year-old footy is a bit of a concern. But given we had multiple picks inside the top 10, or what became 3 picks inside, the top 12 or 13 or top 10 picks of the open draft, we probably could take a punt on a high risk, high reward player. And the potential reward from someone like Sullivan is, a Dangerfield or Martin style player, someone who can contribute at a high level in both the midfield and forward, and could be a match winner, something we've sorely lacked for some time.
Yeah, it's really hard to know what his upside is, mate, given we've only seen half a season of footy from him, really, given that he didn't start playing in the Coates League until after the state champ. So I guess if selected in isolation, if he was our only pick in the first round of the draft, there'd probably be a bit of a perception that this was a bit of a gamble due to the lack of exposure that he's had. But when you see what he did in those games, when you see what he did in the Coates League Grand Final and the impact that he had in big games, and then you pair it with the fact that we had 2 other first round picks in and around him, you're probably in a position to take a little bit of a gamble on talent. And there's no doubt that Sullivan has talent in spades. We've seen his type, not at Essendon, unfortunately, but if you add DeGoey to Dangerfield and Martin and Petraka as well, these are the types that go out and turn and win big games of footy in recent years. And, and I include grand finals in that. And it's a type that we just don't have and haven't had for a long, long time. And unfortunately, once we got into the club, we detected a bit of a hot spot in his lower back. It sounds like that's something that he's been playing and training with, but wasn't really aware of. Clubs aren't allowed to do medical checks on draftees ahead of the draft. They're relying on the information that comes out of combine screening and the AFL's medical checks, and of course the interviews that they do with players. So it's not something we could have or should have known before. But that aside, he'll be back into full training in January. Probably not going to hurt him to back off a little bit, given the amount of work he clearly put into getting his body right and improving his fitness in 2025. Yeah, he'll get back out on the track in January, and I think very much in the frame to see senior footy early in 2026.
The next pick we took ended up being a little bit of a surprise, at least to me. I think we all expected to see either Taylor or Sharp's name called, but we ended up going with Jacob Farrow, another who was potentially projected to go as high as Richmond picks, but it was probably around the area that we took him. So it certainly wasn't a reach by any sense. It sounds like we wanted to end up with both Sharp and Farrow with those two picks after Robey, but felt that Farrow wouldn't have got past Melbourne. So we went with Jacob first. He's a 188 centimetre left-footed halfback who did play midfield at the back end of the season. And I think the thing that stands out most is his disposal, which we've long talked about as a need to improve on the list. I feel like we've drafted him to play as a midfielder, which hasn't always worked out for Essendon, trying to convert halfbacks or half forwards to midfielders. But even if he doesn't make it in that midfield part of the ground, it does look well set up to play a big role in our ball movement from halfback.
Yeah, there was definitely a sense that the D's were interested in Farrow, and who knows whether that interest would have held with Xavier Taylor still available. He was obviously someone that was projected to potentially go to Richmond with one of their two picks. So, but yeah, I think this is where your due diligence really pays off. We had a lot of players in at the club in the lead up to the draft, and we would have seen the photos in the media and social media in and around that. And I think there's an assumption that's due to our own interest in the player, and that would have been the case in some of the cases. But a big part of it is also piecing together information on the interest that other clubs hold and trying to get sort of intelligence on where other picks might land. So, yeah, I think with Farrow, we knew or were confident that they weren't interested in Dyson Sharp. We thought they might have been with Farrow. So you eliminate that risk by jumping on him there. We're a list that lacks silk and class. Probably outside Nick Martin and Zach Merritt, we don't really have much in terms of an ability football ability to work through traffic and use the ball by foot really, really well. What Jacob has that those two don't, though, is penetration by foot. He's not just an accurate kick, but he's a really powerful user of the ball. He's going to end up 190 centimetres or more. And I do think that I get your concern and everyone's concern about trying to turn defenders into mids. But I think the difference with Jacob is he has actually demonstrated at under 18 level that he can play as a bona fide midfielder and play that role effectively. So I think that concern's lessened for me the more and more of his game tape I saw. And I ultimately think that having a big, powerful midfielder that has a left foot like he has can be a real weapon for us and a player that our forwards are going to get really excited about. I think Nat Caddy is going to really love playing with Jacob Farrow in the future.
As he said, we clearly ran the risk that Melbourne both wouldn't be interested in Dyson Sharp, but also they wouldn't listen to offers from teams who wanted to nab him to trade out one of their picks. We know it came out afterwards that Adelaide came really hard at the pick that we ended up taking Dyson Sharp with, and they probably would have I imagine they would have put the same sort of question to Melbourne, given that it was clear that they were probably trying to get Dyson Sharp there, but Melbourne held firm with their picks, and when they didn't take him, there was still some thought that he might take small forward Lockie Doverston, who had been linked to Essendon that pick, another one of those players who quite high profile came through the club prior to the draft. But we went for the guy that I was most excited to get to the club in Dyson Sharp, someone who was projected much higher early on, but fell back a bit as probably players that are more exciting when passing, players who have a bit more wow factor than what Dyson does or displays. Dyson is something I think we've sorely lacked for some time. Someone you can stick in the middle of the ground to be sure that they're going to impact both offensively and defensively. And then he's got his leadership, which is just the icing on the cake. I think he's been written off as just an inside midfielder, but everything I've seen of him suggests that he's far more than that, particularly given what he's displayed at Sandford level against mature bodies, something a lot of other players in this draft haven't done. I think he starts round one in the guts at this stage, and he'll be well suited to AFL level. I imagine he'll take to it really quickly.
Yeah, look, just on Dobson, I don't think he was ever truly in the frame for us. I get the link because small forwards are of need, and he, was one of the better performed ones, but I don't think he was a player we really did have an appetite to take, particularly in that part of the draft. I think Sharp was always our guy. We thought, as I said, that there might be a chance that they take Farrow, the Ds, but Sharp was going to be there. And in the end, he was. I think you're right. I think he starts round one. I think he's ready to go physically. He's ready to go mentally. This is a kid that looks already like he's a 150-game professional, albeit at only 18 years of age. And probably not since Jobe Watson have we had a big inside mid. Like Jobe, there was concern around sort of pace and ability to spread and also kicking as well. The difference between Dyson and Jobe is Dyson's gone and corrected that as a 17-year-old and really gone to work on his game to add bows and strings to it. He's improved his running capacities. He's improved his ability to go forward and play as a forward, take a mark and hit the scoreboard. And he's improved his kicking. Watching him live at training and then also through the videos that are available on social media, one thing that he's added to his game in his kicking that he potentially wasn't always there is he's now straightening his hips through the ball, which, is something that, again, Jobe didn't correct those things until he was sort of in his third or fourth year into the system and ultimately became a really good player. I think Dyson's done that work already. And, that's not to say he's going to be a Jobe Watson. He might be. But, the signs are there that this kid is someone who's going to do everything that it takes to become a really, really good AFL footballer and not just become a good player, but become a good teammate and a good club person and improve the other players around it. And it's not going to happen straight away, but the flow-on effect, if he becomes the player that we hope that he might, and once he's got games under his belt, is the likes of Merritt, Durham, Parrish, Nick Martin, once he's back as well, they can all then go and play to their strengths rather than having to go and win inside ball or even, in Zach's case or Nick Martin's case, worry about finding an opponent, because they're the things that Dyson Sharp will bring to our midfield. He's a real turning point that set up the way that our midfield is going to operate going forward.
Yeah. Then on to night 2 of the draft. Having retained pick 36, not matching the Suede bid, we ended up taking Max Kondogiannis from the Oakley Chargers. There are a few people surprised that we didn't take Xavier Taylor with our earlier picks, but, I think we've managed to pick up a similar type in Max that can play sort of that third tall intercepting defender mould. He starts at champs level in terms of marks, disposals, and rebound 50. He's actually exceeded Taylor's. I think Taylor probably is the superior one-on-one defender, and that's probably what has caused Max to sort of slip back down the draft order. Coming into the draft, I didn't think sort of medium defenders was an area of need for us, but it seems like at this situation, we've just taken who we thought was the best talent at the pick.
Yeah, I certainly didn't do as much research on this part of the draft as I did the early parts of the draft. So Max isn't someone that I've watched a lot of. I do think there's a view here, though, that he's a player that can give us some real flexibility. He can play as a third tall down back and be that sort of intercepting defender. He can play as a running halfback and use his speed to really explode from that part of the ground. He'll be able to play on a wing. He can go forward. So, sort of like Archie Roberts and Angus Clark, who have shown that they can play in different roles. He's a player that can be used in a variety of roles as well and bring some attributes that our list sorely needed in terms of speed and skill. And then I think your point on medium defender, you're probably right if you just look at numbers, but the game is switching towards sort of two key defenders and then a third who can sort of play a bit more flexible, play taller, but give you run and drive as well. We've got Mason Redmond who can do that. Jackson Pryor got better as the year that went on, but still probably some question marks over him as a long-term option. So, there probably was a bit of a need to add another option to that part of the ground, depending on where we see someone like Angus Clark playing his footy in the future.
Yeah. An area of the list that was in dire need of strengthening was the small forward category, particularly given who we let go of at the end of the season. And I don't think once it got to a certain point, there was ever any doubt that we would match the bid for Hussein El-Achkar. What I like about Hussein is he can play that closer to goal role. It's a player that doesn't get a huge amount of touches, but makes them count on the scoreboard when he does. And I think that lines up quite well with what Kako is projecting as more of that high half forward type. I did manage to get down to training a week and a bit ago, and Huss is someone who stood out just for his creativity and his ability to make something out of nothing. And, I think he's a sneaky chance of being an early debut next year, given that it's an area that we really need. And if he ticks all the boxes through the preseason, he could be one of those players that is making their debut early.
Yeah, you're right, mate. We saw with Isaac as 2025 unfolded that he's probably most dangerous higher up the ground, running back towards goal, whereas Huss is that genuine close to goal crummer. He's one that I'm really interested, like you, to keep an eye on in the 2 practice matches and even in proper match sim before that, because there is a role for him there in senior footy. I think if we think back through the Brad Scott era, Alwyn Davey Jr. slightly built. He played, I think, debuted round 1, didn't he, in Brad Scott's first game as coach in what was Waller's comeback game, and sort of played the first 9 or 10 games of that season and got a bit of an opportunity. Isaac Kako himself is obviously a bit more physically developed and ready to go, but played every game last year. Jai Menzies sort of came in and got plenty of opportunities early. So Brad has shown that he'll give games to small forwards early on in their career. So, yeah, I think what I like about him is his ability to get to the right spot, win the ball at ground level, and then he gets his foot to ball in really fast time. His sort of hand to foot speed is really, really fast, and that's what sets him out, I think, from some of the others that we've tried in small forward roles in recent years. He doesn't need to take steps to balance up or accelerate away. He's able to gather, kick, and more often than not, put the ball in the right spot.
Indeed, and look, on the night, I think there were some of us that were disappointed that Hussein wasn't able to make it through to become a Category B rookie, which would have happened if, he lasted a couple more picks. I think it was the second or third last pick in the draft he was ended up taking. But, when one door closes, another door opens, and that's allowed us to be able to sign Killian Burke from Ireland in that second Category B spot. He's come highly rated from his performances in Gaelic football, particularly regards to his athleticism. He'll obviously be coming from a long way back, given he needs to learn how to kick with the Australian rules football. But, they've given him a 2-year deal, so he'll have time to see if his natural attributes can translate to the Australian game. It is also probably too early to project what position he could play as well, so he'll be a definite early watch in the VFL to see what sort of plans they have for him.
Yeah, I think his physical attributes lend themselves to playing at half-back, and I think the benefit of that role as someone who's still trying to learn the game is that he can see the game come at him and follow the ball that way. He doesn't have to try and make the play. And I think as he's learning at VFL level, that should set him up really well. He's an exceptional athlete, and from all reports, he really loves the physical aspects of the game. He's quite brave and tough in the contest. He really thrives on the physical side. So, yeah, he'll be an interesting one to watch in the VFL this year for sure.
Indeed. And look, just finally, the unfortunate re-injury to Nick Martin that will see him out for the entirety of 2026 has given us the ability to get a replacement player in for the year. A lot of teams will let a couple of players train on and make a decision closer to the season, but we've already locked in Will Setterfield as that player. Look, if, and it's a big if given his history, he can be fit for the full year, there's definitely value in having someone of Will's size and experience on the list as a backup in case our midfielders go down, or to provide support in the VFL, particularly for those developing midfielders, to give them someone experienced to learn off and protect them in that situation. But I am a bit concerned about, selecting depth players with the injury history that he's got. It's also probably going to be a missed opportunity to get another younger player in the door that could fix some of our issues longer term. And look, I'm a big fan of Will Setterfield. I think he's brought a lot in his 3 years at the club. And I think it was also probably time to move on and have a look at someone else. As I said, if you're a depth player, you have to be ready to play. And too often in the past 3 years, Will hasn't been ready or hasn't been able to, take his role when he's been needed. So that's where I sort of came down. But I have fingers crossed that if he can have a injury-free year and we can see the best of Will Setterfield.
Yeah, like you, mate, I've been a big fan of Will Setterfield, but just 27 games out of a possible 69. It was a difficult case for me to make to keep him on the list or to re-add him once the list spot opened up, sadly due to Nick's re-injury. I know there's some young guys who went undrafted that we were keen on and perhaps if we had have had the benefit that, say, West Coast has got this year with their concessions and being able to add extra rookie spots and something that I've been campaigning for a long time, we might very well have drafted a couple of extra 18-year-olds. So I was a little surprised that maybe we didn't get a couple of young guys to train on with us and then have a closer look before deciding to lock Will in, particularly, this far out. But I guess then if I play devil's advocate to my own argument, we are an incredibly young list with just one 30-year-old on the list. 21 players on the list have been added since the 2023 national draft that came to the club without any prior AFL experience. A calm, wise head to help these young guys through, is needed as well. So, look, I don't necessarily think there's a right or wrong here. We're not a list that lacks for young talent. We are a list that lacks for experience and guys who can help the young blokes show the ways. Look, if he can help develop our next group of young players through his leadership and his professionalism, then perhaps that's the role that he can play for us in 2026.
Well, that takes us to the list analysis portion of the episode. And, this morning, the club actually announced that we actually had a re-signing of one of the players that was out of contract in 2026 with El-Achkar, extending his deal for another 2 years, taking him to 2028. When I did my predictions for signings of the out-of-contract players, Angus was the first player I did expect to get locked up, but even I didn't expect it to be as soon as it has been. I thought it was one of the easiest and most straightforward contract decisions you could get. He's a young player, he's shown plenty. He doesn't seem to have any go-home factor. So they've got it out of the way early, and that allows him to really attack the season, because Angus is someone I see playing a lot of senior footy in 2026. He really impressed with what he did last season, particularly given the amount of players around him that go down and the role that he had to take on in that side as a new player. Hopefully with some more senior bodies around him, he can work his way more into the team. And I would expect him to play more games than not at senior level this year.
Yeah, well, I mean, we certainly know that aerobic fitness isn't going to be a challenge for him. You add another pre-season to what was already a supremely fit young man, he's going to cope really, really well. I think for all the doom and gloom that was painted about people wanting to be at this footy club, we really only lost Sam Draper, who got a Godfather free agency offer from the back-to-back reigning premiers to go up there on more money and more tenure than we were prepared to offer for a guy who's played 60 games in 10 seasons, coming off a season-ending Achilles injury. But, Archie Roberts and Nate Caddy extend their contracts when they were already contracted for 2026. El-Achkar now comes out and doesn't want to wait around, doesn't want to see how the preseason goes, doesn't want to see how the season goes. He commits himself and locks himself in for 27 and 28. I do think there's tremendous buy-in in the group that we do have, despite what people are saying. And I think this is another indicator of, exactly that.
Indeed. Look, prior to the draft, I did conduct a list analysis to see where I thought the holes in our list were, to give us some of the ideas, the sort of players Essendon might be looking to get in the draft. When I did that exercise, the biggest areas of need that I saw were an inside midfielder, an in-out midfielder, so someone who can win it on the inside and then burst through and get it to the outside by themselves, an outside midfielder and a small forward. And it just so happened that we managed to get someone that fills each of those categories in the draft. So Sharp is the inside mid, Robey is the in-out mid, Farrow is the outside mid, and Hussein El-Achkar is the small forward. There's obviously no guarantee that all those players are going to make it, but from a purely list build perspective, given the needs of the list, I'm not sure we could have done much better than we did in this last national draft.
Yeah, you asked me back in August what you felt early August, what our biggest needs were, and my top five were a goal kicking or explosive mid, in which we got Robey, an inside contested mid. We got Sharp for that role, a high half forward / mid, so someone who could sort of rotate through, which was a role that Robey also ticks. I'm not sure he's going to be a 80% centre bounce attendances type of player. I think he's going to rotate between half forward and midfield. Distributing half back was next, which is where Farrow likely starts his AFL career. And then fifth, I had a transition midfielder as the next priority, which we didn't get in the draft, but we gained through a fit Darcy Parish, particularly given that he won't have to do the inside grunt work that he's had to do over the last few seasons by virtue of Dyson Sharp ultimately going into that role. So look, these guys will still need to be developed. We need to get games and experience into them, but on profile and what we're seeing in the preseason, we've certainly filled some big needs and gaps on our list.
Yeah, indeed. I guess after this draft period, what are the holes that you still see as being on the list at this stage?
Yeah, I don't want to dismiss this one, but or sound like I'm sitting on the fence. But it's a really hard question to answer at the moment because there's still so many unknowns. I think we're likely still a genuine small forward short, and that assumes that Kako keeps developing, that Huss, can fulfill his potential. I still think we need another creative small forward and pressure small forward to add to that. If Farrow does move into the midfield in the future, then we'll need another distributor at halfback, or decide Al-Hawley take his position this year and take his chance this year or next year, 2026, and lock himself in there. Will Nick Bryan be the ruckman that we hope he might, or do we need to look at the ruck position down the track? Will Archer May be the one to partner Nate Caddy? To Reid and Mackay finally put their injuries behind them and show that they're resilient and become the players that we think they might. What position does Angus Clark play? Will Elijah Sardis come on, or do we need another transition mid to sort of come in once, acknowledging that Darcy Parish is, sort of heading towards the end of his career? I think when you've got so much young talent on your list and so much development ahead of them, I think it's pretty natural to have more questions than answers. That's just the age demographic. So, look, I'm really keen just to track the individual development of our young guys this season and see how many answers we get across the season. But yeah, at the moment, I think on the surface, we've got lots of holes, but we've got lots of options that could fill them. It's just going to be a question of how many of them come on, and the reality is not all of them will.
Yeah, indeed. And look, we're 3 years into the Brad Scott era. We've had extensive turnover of the list, and that was something that Andrew Welsh talked about last night in the AGM, that we've done a lot of hard work to get young talent on the list, and young talent across all key lines that if things go well could develop into a contending list. And, there's no guarantee it's going to happen. Not every talented young player is going to make it, but I think you can definitely see a pathway forward from here where this team could be quite competitive and even push for, premiership contention based on the talent. But, talent doesn't win games. You've got to put in the work. You've got to get the connection between the players, and you've got to have a whole lot of luck as well. So I think we've given ourselves a chance, but it's whether the players and the wider team is able to take that chance. It's really going to define what this team can produce.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we've done. We've set ourselves up with a chance, and that's all it is. The hard work needs to continue. We've got 5 first-round picks in the door over the last 3 national drafts. We've got 3 second-round picks in those 3 drafts as well. We've found a couple of potential late gems in the likes of Archie Roberts and Zach Johnson and some others. We've picked up some talent in the rookie drafts, picked up talent through the mid-season draft. So yeah, look, it's over to our high performance and development coaches now to ultimately bring the best out of them and see how many of those guys can come bona fide AFL players.
Indeed. And a lot of that is also going to come down to the on-field leadership and the players who have to take a step up and lead those younger players forward, teach them how to play and really set the tone. And on the final day of training for the year, we did have confirmation of what we all expected of Andrew McGrath taking up to take on the captaincy, having been vice captain for the past 3 seasons. It's a real big opportunity for Andy to stamp his mark on this young group. From all we've heard, the younger players all seem to respond well to him. Andy himself prepares immaculately. He's rarely missed a game in the last few years, and he never takes a backward step on field. We did get a glimpse of his leadership last year when he was captain in the St Kilda game, and the behind-the-scenes vision of him being mic'd up, the way in which he continually talked to and encouraged his teammates was really encouraging. Is it obviously a different style of leader to what Zach Merritt was? It'd be interesting to see what impact Andy's style of leadership is going to have on this group.
Yeah, look, I think he's going to do a really good job, mate. We've had Sam Walker do some work out at the club in 2025 to help us build out culture and leadership capabilities. And for those not familiar with Sam, he's worked with the LA Rams when they won the NFL Super Bowl, among a range of other professional sporting organisations as a leadership consultant. And he published the book called The Captain's Class, which pretty much is the Bible of, sort of attributes that make the most of effective leaders in the most dominant sporting teams across all the sports, across all of history. For anyone, and I assume that if you listen to our show, you probably are a fan of sports analytics and sports analysis, then yeah, do pick up his book. Or if you know someone who loves that stuff, then and you're looking for a Christmas present, then they'll probably appreciate it because it goes very, very deep. But what's evidently clear from his analysis is that the best player doesn't make the best captain. And I think we've probably seen that with Zach. I think it probably weighed on Zach in the end and became a bit more of a burden than he would have expected or would have liked. And that wasn't without him investing a lot of time and effort into him improving his leadership capabilities and his communication in particular. But, I won't go into all the specifics of the book, but when I reflect back on the traits that he analysed that do, so he identified sort of the 15 or 16 best sporting teams across history. And these were teams that were able to have long-term sustainable success at the top of their sport. And the traits that their captains had in common were doggedness, a willingness to do the thankless jobs in the shadows. And, he refers to the term as the water carrier. So, no job being too small, prepared to, pick up the water bottle and, and take that out, if that was what needed to be done to better the team. A real practical communicator. Emotional control was really important. And that's not to say that the best leaders don't need to show emotion, but the right emotion at the right time is really important. And then having the courage to stand out as well was an attribute that was really highly valued in successful leaders of sporting teams. The courage to stand out is in being comfortable in yourself and the way that you go about things, not trying to be somebody else or conforming to a preconception of what a captain needs to look like. And I think Andy has all of those attributes and more in spades. I think his teammates really respect him. Our young players look up to him. He's got his own game under control, and people will argue about Andy as a footballer and what he does or doesn't do, but that matters very little to how Andy and his coaches see his contribution in his game. And you want someone who is going to go to the game every week confident that they're going to be able to play their best football, at the same time being able to absorb that for 22 teammates and being able to bring them along. And he's not obsessed necessarily being the best player that he can be. He's obsessed with Essendon being the best club it can be, and I think that's going to hold him in really good position to be a really good captain of our footy club.
Yeah, indeed. And look, to support him, we announced an extended leadership group, no named vice captain, but probably the biggest leadership group Essendon's ever had. I can't recall us having a leadership group as big as this. Langford, Redmond and Martin all retained their spots from last year, whilst Durham, Caldwell and Fiorini were added. Durham and Caldwell, they're in that right age bracket of players that we need to carry the load for the younger players as they develop, and it's a really reward for both of their efforts over the past couple of seasons as they've really developed into, first choice players and first choice players that have really led the way for Essendon, particularly in some of our biggest wins. Fiorini was, brought in from Gold Coast clearly as much for his, he's obviously a really good footballer. There's a whole other suite of attributes that Fiorini has, such as his leadership, such as his voice, such as his character, that really attracted Essendon to wanting to get him in. And, track watchers have spoken quite highly about how vocal he's already been. So it's no surprise to me that he's been formally added to the leadership group, given the way he started his time at the club, given that, a big portion of this leadership group is voted by the group itself. It says a lot about the impression that he's made on his teammates in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, look, mate, all very worthy of their position for different reasons. I think it's a really nice progression for Caldwell and Durham. Both still have plenty of work to do in developing their own games and becoming the footballers that we hope that they might. They're not finished products yet, so I think burdening them with the captaincy would have been a stretch too far before they are really comfortable and confident in their own games. But I do think that level of responsibility that will be added as it is just being in the leadership group will help them to elevate themselves as footballers. I've been a really hard critic of Mason Redmond's, and largely because I really believe in his potential. He's a player that's probably frustrated me the most of any that we've had on the list in recent years, because I think he could be much, much better than what we get from him at times. But I really think he turned a corner in the second half of last season. I think the opportunity to ultimately be Andrew McGrath's right-hand man, even without the vice-captain title, I think we'll really see him go to another level. I was sort of thinking today, you touched on it, we haven't named a vice-captain, but if Andy missed a game, who of that group is probably most likely to captain the club? And I think it probably will be Mason, and I think that responsibility will suit him well. And yeah, I actually think we're going to see the best of Mason Redmond from here on in.
Yeah, fingers crossed on that. Well, look, that'll do us for sort of reflecting on the recent developments of Essendon. It's time to put on our fantasy hats and project forward to what's going to be happening next year. As always, or as we've done for the last couple of years, we've also got input from the patrons about what they think about these specific questions here. Some of it's data related, which is the Donstat way, and some of it's just sort of the basic who's going to be the best and fairest and how many wins Essendon are going to get. So, look, let's get stuck into it. The first question that we ask for predictions is, what stat will you be keeping your eye on the most in order to gauge whether the Bombers are improving? There were over 40 people put in their predictions and their thoughts on these questions, and I've just highlighted a couple for each of the categories. Andrew Bucock, amongst others, brought up scores from turnover. It's been a huge issue for Essendon. The last 4 seasons, we've been 16th, 14th, 15th, and 17th in terms of scores against from turnover. So that's us giving the ball up and the opposition scoring, and we've been basically in the bottom 4 for the last 4 seasons. Last season, the top 8 were all ranked 9th or better in terms of scores against from turnover. It's basically a 1-to-1 correlation that if you keep your scores against from turnover down, you'll play finals. I wouldn't expect to go from a bottom 4 side in this metric to a top 8 side in 1 year, but we really would want to start seeing progress in this metric.
Yeah, the Bulldogs were ranked 3rd, so they were sort of the outlier, but probably a team that most would agree underperformed, really. So, yeah, the top 9 sides on the ladder at the end of the home and away season were the top 9 sides ranked in scores from turnover. The grand finalists were ranked 1st and 4th, and the minor premier were ranked 2nd. So you have to be a good team at winning the ball back off the opposition, because you're not going to win every clearance. So you need to be able to pressure and win the ball back. And you're going to turn the ball over yourself at times. And when you do that, you obviously want to be able to win it back too. So, we were good at winning the ball back off the opposition in 2024. We were 4th in 2024 for intercepts, but dropped to 12th in 2025. Yeah, it's really hard to judge what we saw in this season. And I'm prepared to put a line through it because of the instability that we had with the number of injuries and player unavailabilities. Beyond just being good at winning the ball back from the opposition like we demonstrated last year you need to be able to score from those intercepts and turnovers, and we need to start being able to do that. And then, of course, you need to be able to prevent scores being scored against you on turnover as well. And I think that for me is twofold. It's where and how you turn the ball over, and the relative or amount of pressure or non-pressure you do that. Guilty of turning the ball over a lot on slow ball movement, and then also in dangerous parts of the ground, and that impacts your ability to defend it as well. So, look, only West Coast conceded more points from turnover this season. The top 7 in that metric all played finals. So, yeah, I think points for and against on turnover are right up there in gauges on how we can improve.
Yeah, indeed. Another thing that came up a little bit was metres gained per disposal. That came up from both Patrick Ryan and Nick Allen. We were 18th in terms of metres gained per disposal in season 2025. And, at the beginning of the year, it was even lower than what we ended up with. It was sort of 14 meters per disposal, and it slowly crept up actually as the injuries built up and we started to play a little bit more direct. So it'd be interesting to see if they're able to follow that up this year. It's not a metric where if you're at the top of the leaderboard, you're guaranteed to be a good team. It's very easy to just bomb it and turn it over quite easily. But I think the lack of direct ball movement did cost us at times, particularly our ability to put scores on the board. We touched on it after the season, but our top score for last year was 100. Season 2025 was 100 points, and that was the lowest top score for Essendon in a year since the 1930s. Other than the COVID year. So it was clear that, there was issues with scoring, and part of that was our ability, how far we were moving the ball at a time or how quickly we were able to move the ball. So it isn't an issue that we need to look at it. As I said, we don't need to go from last to first in this, and that would probably cause other problems, but we do need to look at ways of having more direct ball movement.
Yeah, I mean, West Coast were ranked 4th for metres gained per disposal in 2025 and won just the one game. Richmond had a higher metres gained per disposal than Brisbane, and Richmond finished second last, and Brisbane won the flag. So look, I do think we want to see it improved. A low metres gained per disposal can generally be a bit of a byproduct of either over handball or sort of sideways slow kicking ball movement. And both of those usually happen in abundance when you're under pressure. But we're sort of talking about moving from an average of 15 meters per disposal this year to sort of 16.5 to get sort of in and around the AFL average. I think more important to me is the number of inside 50s we generate, especially relative to our opponents, so inside 50 differential, and then our ability to score inside 50, so that efficiency once we go in. Again, if we go back to 2024, we were top 4 for getting the ball inside 50, top 4 or 5, but we weren't able to convert that into scores. If you go back to 2023, we were a low inside 50 team, but we were generally pretty good at converting scores once we got in there. So I think our better guide of ball movement for me and successful ball movement is how frequently are we getting inside, and then once we're in, how frequently are we turning that into a score. So yeah, I'll be measuring that more closely in terms of getting a guide on are we being more effective with our ball movement.
Yeah. I think for me, the one thing that I'll look most at, and it's a pretty basic one, but sometimes the basic things that help you give it the best sense of things, is our percentage in 2026. And this was a pretty common comment from listeners such as Derek, Cass, Sam L, and Jack. It's actually been 5 seasons since the Bombers have had a percentage of over 100%, and our best in that time is only 93.5%. I think if the percentage improves, that's a sign that the elements of both attack and defence are improving. We've seen teams that ultimately jumped up the ladder have years where they may not have got the wins on the board, but their percentage improved dramatically, and that was sort of a precursor to what became successful years. So yeah, I think that'll be a big watch for me in 2026. Other than what you spoke about earlier, Jono, is there anything else you'd be focusing on?
Yeah, look, I think we've covered most of it through the questions and answers from listeners. I think intercepts, 4 and a differential, and then scores for and against from turnover. Inside 50s for and against, score efficiency once inside, both for us and our opposition. But beyond those, I think contested ball and hard ball gets are still very highly valued in modern footy. I know there's a lot of talk about the rule changes and what the AFL is trying to do to keep the ball in motion and speed the game up. And that will be there, but fundamentally, our game starts and finishes with a centre bounce, and there's still going to be congestion and stoppages. Coaches will still find ways to slow the game down when they don't have the footy, and finals are still going to be a real premium on contested and hardball gets. So I'm still going to measure those and keep an eye on those. I don't think you can be a good team in the modern game without winning 4 to 50 ground balls. We were 15th in 2025. The grand finalists were 2nd and 3rd. So I want to see an improvement there. To do that, you need to get the ball inside 50 more as well. I'll be keeping an eye on the number of marks we concede as well as a measure of our ability to close space and deny the opposition. We conceded the most marks of any team in 2025. The Premiers were 4th least, and the 3 teams better than Brisbane all played finals. So I think, for us to improve as a side, we need to deny easy ball to our opponents more than we did this year.
Yeah. Moving on to the next question, which was, what is the major game plan change you'd like to see? Almost half of the respondents to the survey indicated they want to see more ball speed, which has been a legitimate criticism of Essendon for a while now. There has been a variety of causes, the types of players we've been picking or have had available, the ability of the players up the field to create space to allow for that faster ball movement, or working hard to provide targets. From the training watchers, it seems there has been a big focus at training so far this off-season, but I do recall last off-season, leading into 2025, that also seemed to be a big focus of what they were doing during training, and they weren't actually able to translate it into actual games. So as exciting as to hear, and we love the training watches and what they provide, I want to see it in practice against actual oppositions before we can say that we are actually moving the ball faster, even despite what we see at training.
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer, mate, because I don't think anyone can really tell you accurately what our game plan is or that of any other team. And unless you're sort of in the inner sanctum, only the players and coaches know what the design is meant to look like. I don't think beyond that, anyone can objectively point to what we saw of Essendon in 2025. And I say objectively because I think there's plenty of people subjectively pointing to it. But I don't think you can objectively point to it and claim what we saw this season was the players carrying out the instructions from the coaches to the letter of the law. We just didn't have the cattle on the park to do that. And I don't think we've had the list that at any point in Brad Scott's tenure to play a style of footy that either he would want us to play or we need to be playing to be able to compete with the best side. So look, I ultimately want what all of us want, and that's a team that's hard to play against. We haven't really been in a position to do that certainly not in 2025. So hopefully that changes. And that wasn't a lack of desire in this year. I think our level of effort and desire was probably the best it's been in a long time. We just, again, it was boys against men so often. I want a team that embraces the contest and plays a forward half game that sets up to win the ball back close to our own goal. I think we largely saw that back in 2024 when we had more of our best players to choose from, but we just didn't have the quality on our list to make the most of it going inside 50. I think those qualities have improved with the players that we've drafted over the last couple of off seasons. So yeah, those players are still inexperienced and haven't played a lot of footy together. So it's going to take a little bit of time still to get right. But yeah, I can't point to a major change. I think I just want to, and we'll touch on it a little bit further on, but, I've been thinking a lot about that 2024 season and what I liked and what does it look like now that we've added some, particularly young players, but also Braden Fiorini to our list who can help take our game take that 2024 game style to another level and add some more quality, particularly with ball in hand.
Yeah. A few other the respondents and Zach, Josh, and Brian Nolan were all people who brought this up. All spoke about embracing the chaos in the game plan a bit more. And that's another thing that Essendon has been at times, been quite risk averse with their ball movement because, if you think about the best patches of play that Essendon had, particularly in the back half of 2025, they were when we sort of embraced that more chaotic game style. The thing that comes to mind is the way we played against Geelong in Geelong during that third quarter, where we did create a lot of chaos in our forward line, which was a real departure from what was happening in sort of that first half. We were willing to let the ball hit the ground and see what we could turn that into. And it was one of the only occasions in recent times against the Cats that it felt like they were having trouble playing against us. It's not something you really see in Essendon and Geelong games where you see Chris Scott quite flustered with what Essendon is doing. Normally it's almost like a night off for the Geelong coaches when they play Essendon. And then another occasion, I think one of my favourite plays of the year, I think if I'm recalling correctly, it was the Saints game where Kyle Langford got the ball on the wing and he had a sort of a one-on-one contest ahead of him. Instead of kicking high, which would have probably favoured the St Kilda defender, he decided to just sort of dribble it along the ground, which gave more opportunity for the Essendon player to turn into something. I think it was Kako. I might be misremembering, but Kako was able to turn that into a goal. I just saw it was one of the smartest plays I've seen from an Essendon player, and it was all about it sort of embracing that chaos. With the normal play is to sort of kick that high to the contest, but by going a different route, it ultimately resulted in the goal. Then that doesn't always work out that way, but taking those unconventional options that also throw the defenders out of whack, again, is the sort of things that can give you an advantage, and it's the sort of things we're going to need to be able to do if we're going to be competitive against the best teams for long periods of games.
Yeah, I think it might have been Menzies who then got it over to McMahon, I reckon, who kicked it from the goal square. But yeah, I mean, you touched on two games that stand out to me, and there's a third one for me as well. So, that St Kilda game for the unrelenting pressure and desire for the hard ball and contest in that game, for pretty much minute one to the last minute of the game was there at a level that I hadn't seen in a long time. So, we want more of that. That second half against Geelong was probably the best half of footy, I reckon, that we played this year. Really undermanned down at Kondogiannis Park, a place that, most teams struggle to get success at. And we really did embrace having the ball on the ground, that dirty ball inside 50 and then pressuring the Geelong back six. We made Geelong uncomfortable by refusing to give them what they wanted. And what they wanted was, long kicks to their numbers in their defensive 50s. Again, more of that. And then the game against Brisbane at the Gabba where, we went behind early, but then we really took the game on and backed our young players to demonstrate their attributes. We scored a lot from stoppages that night. That's probably not a sustainable, scoring method week in, week out, and history success suggests that that's the case. But it was more the mindset of just wanting to take that game off, not being overawed by the fact that we're playing the reigning premiers. And just playing to our strengths. And again, more of that would be great. So, yeah, I think all you can do out of this year is take the moments and project forward to think, well, if we can sustain these for longer in games by virtue of these young players getting stronger and fitter and faster, and we bring more of our seasoned players back, what does that look like? Well, the hope for me is that we see more football like those, like what we saw in those games this year.
Yeah, indeed. The next question was, what is your biggest question mark going into 2026? Jamie and Greg both brought up the forward mix. And for me, if I'm thinking about the makeup of the team, that's probably the most open in terms of who will fill the spots. I think there's clear pecking orders at this stage in terms of the defensive and the centre thirds. But for me, the forward line is a lot more open as to who's going to start there in 2026.
Yeah, I've got question marks all over, to be honest, mate, and not in a bad way. I think it's just the nature of the youth and age demographic of our list. But who rucks round one? Is it Blackiston or Vicentini? Probably Blackiston's got the sort of edge in terms of physical maturity. How do we line up down back? Is it if all three tools are available? Is that the way that we go? What does that then mean for Redmond, who's probably played his best footy as a third tall? What does it mean for Pryor? Does he get forced out? Or will it leave one of the three talls and we sort of follow, or leave one of them out and be brave enough to go, sorry, Mackay, or sorry, Reid, or sorry, Jordan Ridley, you're not getting a game, because on balance, it's not the way that we're going to go. On talent, yes, but not on balance and structure. And we follow the model that most other clubs are going with and give ourselves more run behind the footy. I think in the midfield, my question mark is how we integrate our draftees and will we be in a position where we can rotate them as well? Because Dyson Sharp, as exciting and mature as he is, isn't going to be able to play 23 home and away games as a centre bounce midfielder in year one. He's going to need to be rotated through. We saw Roberts go in late in the season. We saw Kako go in late in the season. Both show good signs in there. How do we continue to integrate them and give them spurts in the midfield? What does Sam Durham's mix look like between forward and midfield? What does Zach Merritt's mix look like? I think there's big question marks there, particularly if, Darcy Parish is fit and back to playing big minutes. I think forward line balance is definitely the biggest question mark. Do we go with three talls? How do we fit Langford and Perkins into that mix, or don't we? Who takes the small spot? I'm really not sure about. So I think you're right. Biggest question mark is on the forward line, but I've got questions throughout. Also, how do we use that extra bench spot? Do we go an extra tall? Is it a chance for the true sort of utility in Nick Cox that can play multiple positions? To sort of play more footy? Is it just, play a kid on, modified minutes? Yeah, an extra running player. Yeah, that big question mark on that one too.
Absolutely. Otherwise, and it's not surprising given what happened in 2025, but most other respondents, such as the Badger and Paul Hobbs, brought up our ability to keep our best players fit during the season. I know everyone's really excited about the new fitness team and the way in which they're approaching training, but it probably will still take time for the results to come through from this investment in terms of fitness and availability of players.
Yeah, look, as a fan base, we've had false dawns before. I think it's understandable that most Essendon fans are cautious optimists. We want to be optimistic. We want to buy into the hope and we want to believe, but we're cautious about being hurt again. And I get it. I think there's still going to be injuries along the way. We play a really brutal sport, and where it's just going to happen. So if we're expecting zero injuries, then we're going to set ourselves up for disappointment. The other thing that we're clearly doing is ramping up the intensity of our training and trying to really push our players a lot more than we have in the past. And that comes with risk too. We now have an expectation that at least in the main session of each week that our players are training at above game day levels of intensity in terms of their running output. So, with the design of that being that their bodies are up to it on game day, I suspect that the feeling in years gone by is we were aerobically fit, but not necessarily game day fit, and that's why we saw so many players breaking down. I think last year we got to the practice matches with a really fit and healthy list, but then as soon as games started playing, injuries started to occur. So I think that philosophy has really changed, and the mandate now is that in that main session we're training at above game day intensity. And again, that doesn't come with risks. We're going to have to break a few eggs to make the omelette. But we measure, or clubs measure, high speed running at training as the distance covered in kilometres at 80% or more of an individual's max speed. And from what I understand, as of last Wednesday, across the last three pre-seasons, our three best sessions for total distance covered at high speed all occurred in the 2 weeks prior. So, we've most definitely gone to another level in terms of training at that high intensity, high speed running, and 6 of the top 10 have happened in this preseason. So that's a noticeable change in how we're attacking this preseason, and the hope would be that when games start being played, we have a list that's physically much more resilient than they've been in the past.
Yeah. Moving on, the next question was who will be 2026 breakout player, and I sort of split this into 2 categories based on what people presented. In terms of the new draftees, Dyson Sharp is the name that came up the most as a player that had the impact straight away. It's all said by Dion, Steph Seymour, and Damien Davidson. I think with Dyson, we've had players that have been drafted that have been able to come in straight away and contribute in the senior side, but most of those have started in other positions. You think of McGrath and Heppel in the back line. Zach Merritt started as a half forward, as a small forward, and then moved into the midfield. Zach Kako sort of done the same. I might be the first player I can remember that looks set up to come in and play big midfield minutes from straight away. And that's for the non-first year players. Angus Clark's name appears a few times. Jared Feehan and Chris Mitel specifically mention him. He looks like someone who, if we didn't have the injuries we did, he may have played 3 or 4 games at best last season, sort of like what Archie Roberts did the season before. But the extra exposure that he got last year really is going to set him up well. I see him being played as sort of that third winger, 7th defender rotation, sort of what we played Dyson Heppel in his last couple of years on the list. His ball use and ability to run is going to be crucial in both the ball movement and defensive structure for the Bombers in 2026.
Yeah, I agree with you on how Clark is likely to be used. I think that this stage of his development, that's the perfect role for him. On Sharp, I touched on it before. It's a huge ask for him to come in and play as a midfielder at AFL level from day one and maintain it across the full season. I think there'll be ups and downs, but yeah, I think there's plenty of reason to be excited for both. Little bit sort of left field. I think Ben Mackay and Zach Reid are 2 I'd like to throw up. I know both have been around for a while, so probably not what you had in mind when you posed the question to me, but I think a fit Ben Mackay and a team with some better ball use ahead of him, which means he's not as exposed on fast turnover as often, can be an all-Australian squad level player. His intercept marking is up there with the best in AFL key defenders. And then Zach Reid's talent, I think we saw it last year. I'm banking on those 2 being fit and really starting to put their name up in lights. I think a bit of a left field one, again, probably not someone who's going to have a breakout year, but probably I think show some signs that we start to realise that we might have a player on our hands, and that's Archer Day Wicks. I think he's moving really well at training. His chest is up, his chin's up, he really is running on top of the ground. I think there's a spot up for grabs in the forward line. So I think we'll see him play some really good footy at senior level this year. I think his football ability, I think we sort of those that have watched him know that the skill set is there. He's probably just needed the fitness and the preparation, having had an interrupted 2024 and then 2025 pre-season. So I think he's one that will start to show some real signs. But I think true spirit of the question as it was asked, I'm going to nominate Saad Al-Houli. I think we saw some improvements in his defensive work in late 2025. We've seen some huge improvements in his fitness this pre-season. He looks like an Adonis out on the training track. And I think he's really starting to feel comfortable being in an AFL environment and starting to come into his own. And I'm backing him to really add something to our half-back line in 2026.
Yeah. Moving on, and the next question was who has the most to prove in 2025? And I don't think it's much surprise to anyone, but the 2 players that most people brought up for this question were Archie Perkins and Elijah Sardis. Both are out of contract this season. Both clearly have talent that they haven't fully realised yet. I think for the first time in his career, Perkins probably has selection pressure for his spot. Think of players like Edwards or Robey or you just mentioned him before, Archer Day Wicks. If they start performing, then Perkins' spot in the team is really up for grabs. You've got Sardis, who's probably still behind Parrish, Merritt, Durham and Caldwell for a starting midfield spot. Sharp's coming up quickly. We've got Robey and Farrow coming through. There's a lot of options there. And he could be leapfrogged as well. Again, really big years for these 2 players, particularly given how ruthless we've been in terms of letting someone like a Ben Hobbs go, who was a first-round draft pick only 4 years ago. We're not going to stick with players who we don't think are going to contribute going forward just because of where they were drafted. In a similar vein, Nick McFarlane has brought up Jay Gresham, another who's in the final year of a contract, although there has been some suggestions that he may have a trigger for a 4th season. So if he does have that, maybe you'll get McGovern towards the end of the year. He struggled to have a consistent impact last year, and we saw with what Kako did, we've touched on it a few times, that he can sort of perform that, small forward moving up into the midfield role Gresham probably is best suited to. So if an El-Achkar and an Unwin come on as well, they could find himself out of the best 22 quite quickly if the gap between his best and worth doesn't start closing.
Yeah, look, they're the three that came to mind for me too, mate. Perkins, Sardis and Gresham. I think all of them are out of contract at the end of 2026. Perkins and Sardis, look, they're still pretty young, and they both have demonstrated that they have high-end footballing talent. So if it's not at Essendon, it's hard to see how they're not both on an AFL list in 2027. So I don't think, regardless of what happens in 2026, it's probably not the end of the road for them at AFL level. But Jade Gresham, he's already at his second club. If he doesn't make every poster winner in 2026, then, it could be career over for him. So, yeah, I think he's probably the one who's got the most at stake.
The next question was first two debutants for 2025. Only one person out of the 40 who responded didn't have Sharp as one of their first two debutants. And as we've sort of touched on already from all the training reports, it seems like he's ready to go. There was a mixture for the second debutant, most going with a Farrow or Robey, although a lot of those votes came through before Robey had his setback with his back. As I said earlier, after seeing only one training session, I wouldn't be surprised if Hussein gets a run early on. As I said, he did a couple of things in the session that makes me think he can impact early on this season in a role that we lack a lot of depth in, and there's spaces open to be taken. What's your thoughts, Jono?
Yeah, look, I think Sharp is pretty much guaranteed to be there in round one, mate, if he continues on the trajectory that he has so far this pre-season. I'm with the listeners. It's a toss coin between Farrow and Robey. I'll go with Farrow, not just because of the delayed start for Robey, but I think he probably had the most work to do to get his fitness base up regardless, and we won't rush him through now that he has had that sort of setback. So, yeah, I think Sharp round one. I think Farrow's a chance for round one as well, but if not, pretty close thereafter.
Yeah. The next one's a pretty basic question and has had a pretty similar answer for all the years been doing Don the Start and who will win the Crichton. And no surprises, even after everything that happened, that the most selected player was Zach Merritt, given his history, basically a 50% Crichton medal rate since he got to the club. I was worried a bit about how he would come back into the club following the trade period drama, but everything that's been seen suggests he's fully committed to putting his best foot forward this season. If he performs at his peak level, it's hard to see anyone beating him. The other player that showed up in a lot of votes was Zach Reid, and I think a full year of Reid performing at the level he showed sort of in his few games last season, and he would also probably go pretty close. What's your pick, Jono?
Yeah, I mean, if he wins it, he'll be winning his fourth in a row, which is an incredible feat on in its own right, and he'll be winning his seventh in total, which brings him equal with Bill Hutchison and Dick Reynolds. Just having a quick look, I think Dick did win four in a row, 36, 37, 38, and 39. Without going through all of them, I'd imagine that Zach will be just the second in our history to win 4 Crichton medals in a row. I actually think without the burden of leadership, we might just see the best of Zach Merritt. I think he'll not only add to his Crichton medal tally, but also his All-Australian tally in 2026. I think he'll have an unreal season. Just to make the exercise a little bit more interesting, I'll throw Sam Durham as my runner-up and Ben Mackay to crack the top 6.
There you go. Next question was who will win the goal kicking, and Peter Wright and Nate Caddy were both neck and neck in terms of the predictions from listeners, with Wright having 18 votes to Caddy 16. Both are pretty good predictions. You'd expect that those two are going to get the first crack in the side, so they'll have the most opportunity to kick goals. For me, if Caddy is able to improve his goal kicking accuracy, sort of gone at 50% through his career, I think for someone you see as one of your one or two key forwards, you've probably got to get that above, at the very least, 55% and probably closer to 60%. But if he's able to do that, then he's my pick for next season.
I'm going to stick with Peter Wright, mate. I think Nate Caddy is going to start to get more opposition attention this year. And, if we bank on some better ball and better quality inside 50, more inside 50 entries, then, I think Wright might get some more favourable matchups as a result of Nate's progression and just pip Nate out for the Matthew Lord Award.
And the final question was how many wins will Essendon have in 2026? Predictions range from the listeners from 6 to 15 wins, but the most votes came for 10 wins, though, which I think is where we were headed for in 2025 if injuries didn't hit. If we had a reasonable level of player availability, I think we probably beat the Tigers in return game. We probably beat the Saints. The Swans game up at the SCG was probably close. The first Suns game, we were in at 2 or 3/4 time. They were probably also winnable. You don't know how other games play out. So, look, for me, I think 10 wins is a benchmark that I'll be taking as our lower end of performance in 2026 all things being equal, if we perform at the level we should, we have the availability we should, we should be starting from a 10-win perspective and trying to push up from there.
Yeah, we won 11 and a half games in 2024, and I went back and had a look at the list that played 12 or more games in that season. So played, half the season or more. We lose Nick Martin, of course, for the whole season. And then in terms of players that are no longer on the list, we've lost Sam Draper, who played 16 games that year, Jake Stringer, Todd Goldstein. Jake Stringer's obviously a decision that we made and kicked some 40 odd goals in 2024. Then, Todd Goldstein, Nick Hind, Jaden Laverde, Jake Kelly, Ben Hobbs, and Jai Menzies. None of those are players that anyone would lament, losing all that much. I wouldn't have thought. Goldie was very serviceable again in 2025, but only, because of injuries. Yeah, we haven't lost a whole heap other than, Nick Martin, of course, is a big loss. And then, Jake Stringer's 40 goals, I guess, are the main losses there. But in terms of what we add into that, we hopefully add a fully fit and available Zach Reed, Jordan Ridley and Darcy Parish, who played very little footy between them in 2024. Nate Caddy and Archie Roberts came into the side late in the season in 2024. They benefit from playing most of 2025 and then, another pre-season. So they come into next year as, third-year players and now sort of bona fide AFL footballers. Angus Clark and Isaac Kako come in, in their second season after another full pre-season under their belt. We get, hopefully Nick Bryan, sort of second third of the season, 25-year-old, bit more mature body, and then Braden Fiorini as well. So, and then we add on to that the depth of young players that we've added to the list over the last couple of years as well, who can rotate through. So, I think our list is better in 2026, or will be better in 2026, assuming that we get better player availability than what we had in 2024. The competition doesn't stand still. We're playing catch up. 18 clubs will be expecting to improve in 2026. But yeah, I think if we're prepared to say that, we won 11 and a half games in 2024 and we've got a better list now, and if we get better player availability and player continuity, then I think we can win 12 plus games, all things going well. But again, we're going to be relying on young players, sort of developing and stepping up to be able to do that.
Yeah, indeed. And, if we do get to that 12 games, that probably gets us into sort of the wild card space. And as Andrew Dillon said, a wild card win is a finals win. So, if we're thereabouts, it could be breaking the drought year next year, even if it doesn't go any further than that. Big thanks to everyone who filled in the survey there. Some great thoughts and ideas that we were able to bounce off there. All right, we're sort of moving on to the final part, and this last part of our end of year episode is always a bit self-indulgent, but it's been a long year, and I think we deserve to be a bit self-indulgent while also reflecting on sort of the people that make Don the Stack great. And I think as we always do, we do this end of year wrap-ups. I think the big thing that I've taken out of the podcast is just how good it's been at bringing people together. I've met so many people through doing this show that are now considered to be really good friends, and it seems that circle expands year on year. Obviously, the pre-game catch-ups especially are always good value, regardless of how the game ends up panning out. So thank you for anyone who's attended any of those during the season, whether you're one of the regulars or you've just popped in once or twice. It's always been great to see you and chat with you pre-game. If you are listening to this, it is a few months out before we do the next one, but you've had thoughts about coming down but just haven't been brave enough, please do come along next year. Everyone's really friendly and welcoming, and we can always try and take over another table at Founders Bar. I think we're consistently getting two, and there's a good opportunity to get a third there if you get some bigger numbers pre-game. So, I think 4 or 5 years we might be able to fill out the whole space pre-game with the way things are going. So yeah, do come along if you do have the opportunity pre-game.
Yeah, I think we're not far away from taking naming rights at Founders Bar, mate, the way that it's going. But yeah, in what was a tough year on field, to catch up with so many friendly faces and talk footy, talk life and everything else. And some of those are people that have been along for the journey since the very start with us, and some of them are only new this year. It's been a lot of fun and real enjoyment out of people who come to Melbourne from interstate to sort of catch their one game for the season and make a V-line to try and catch up and meet, not just you and I, but the rest of the crew as well. So yeah, thank you to everyone who makes that what it is. It's it's much more than just a footy club. It really is a really special community.
Yeah, indeed. Another thing to, I think, reflecting on has just been, our focus on YouTube as a platform. And a lot of that was sort of forced by Google Podcasts being shut down and sort of people being transferred over and YouTube becoming a bigger actor in podcast space. But it's really starting to gain a lot of momentum. We're starting to put out video versions of this podcast. So for those of you who haven't met us, you do get to see our lovely faces and my lovely garage, as you can see from behind me. It is quite a mess, and luckily I've framed it so you can't see the carnage behind me as much as possible. I've also enjoyed putting out a few YouTube exclusive videos as well. I know my video editing is terrible and they're just glorified PowerPoint presentations, although that does suit me well as a teacher. But people have also really responded well to it. If you are looking to give us some sort of Christmas present, subscribing to the YouTube channel would be a great one. We've reached over 500 subscribers on that and really looking to push forward into the 4 figures mark, hopefully early in the new year.
Yeah, it's low on production value, but hopefully high on content quality. I think one thing that you and I have always said we would stay true to is quality over quantity. So we try to live that mantra, but that quality extends to the research that we put into what we produce, not necessarily the end production elements. But yeah, YouTube's been a really interesting learning experience, learning and experimenting with a new platform. Our socials have really kicked off as well. We've been putting more content out on Instagram and Facebook as well. We would like to do a lot more if we had the time, but yeah, day jobs and families do tend to get in the way at times, which is a little bit of a pain. But it's been lots of fun, exposing ourselves and learning to those new channels this year.
Yeah, indeed. And just in general, the show doesn't exist without the listeners we have. And, I thought we'd hit a high mark of listeners over the past couple of years, but it just continues to grow. Our most recent episode we did with Rick Edwards, where we're talking about potential draftees. That's the biggest in our history in terms of downloads. So look, every time I think we hit a ceiling, we seem to smash right through it. And obviously I have to give a big shout out to the Patreon community. We talked about them early on with the massive amount of sign-ups that have happened in the last couple of months. And, we were sitting here this time last year really gobsmacked that we were able to double how many people were signed up from the previous year. Well, we've nearly doubled it again as we sit here at the end of 2025. And it's really just become such a great community. The chat is lively. The people are great. And the thoughts that people post are always well considered. We say it every year, the live Q&A episodes we do, we're up to 3 a year now, where we get our patrons on to sort of ask us questions and we respond live to it. Is always a highlight because we do get to spend time with the patrons and they're always well thought out questions and just great people to spend some time with. I've also tried to have a go at doing a weekly video segment on the Patreon, sort of analysing, so a moment in the game. Real life sort of got in the way and I couldn't quite produce that every week, as fun as it was. And as much as I can, I will try to get them up on a regular basis next year because I think people really do appreciate them again, even with my rudimentary video editing skills.
Yeah, the audience is incredible and the scale at which it's grown. We've told this story before, but our first episode was a preview ahead of round 1 against Geelong in 2022. So our first game was Nick Martin's first game as well, and I played in a cricket grand final the next day. You came down and watched and got really excited when we got to 100 downloads and told me about it. And yeah, we've gone obviously well past that now. And yeah, it still spins me out that people bother listening to my voice. I get sick of hearing myself talk. The fact that people tune in every week and give up their time and in a lot of cases also give up a few dollars a month as well. Yeah, it really does blow my mind. Yeah, I really, really love what we do and what we've put together. We're both really passionate about our football club and helping people enjoy the game in our club, more than they have in the past and try and share our knowledge and our insights and help enrich that experience. And, it's a more not competitive in the true sense because I don't think any of the club content creators are truly competing against each other, because we all want the same thing, and that's a successful Essendon Football Club. But there are many, many more options out there than ever before, and so many creators creating such good content. So the fact that people continue to choose us and do so at increasingly larger numbers, entirely grateful for that. And I think just sort of beyond that, on a sort of beyond the content side, and there's a lot of great footy minds in our Patreon community who see the game in different ways, have different views on things that you and I do, put up some real thought-provoking points of view that challenge me and get me to think about things in different ways. And I really thoroughly enjoy that, because I know I can get caught in my own sort of stubbornness and way of seeing things. So yeah, I really appreciate everyone who continues to share their thoughts, and then sort of beyond just footy, it's a really highly emotional, intelligent group as well, and it really does get behind one another and supports, you know, causes and things that people share. I've had a particularly challenging year with a number of you know, family challenges on top of a really demanding work schedule and lots of travel. And I think most people will know I took a break from socials in the middle of the year for a number of reasons, but the main one really was just I needed to get some time to work on myself and my mental and physical health, and prioritize that, and sort of more present for my family. And you know, the number of people that have reached out with genuine care and compassion has been incredible. I know I've thanked you all individually as you've sent through messages or made phone calls, but I also want to say it here too that, you know, I'm really grateful to each and every one of you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And again, like, not to the same level, but yeah, I agree. The way in which, you know, the people in this community talk to each other and look out for each other is spectacular. And thanks from me as well. Another thing that's really stood out to me, and is something we've taken the next step with, is the articles we've been writing to put up on the Donstat website. It's been a great outlet to put out some ideas in a different format to the podcast, and it has actually finally given me value for that 1 year of journalism subjects I did at uni nearly 20 years ago now, back in 2006, when I thought I was going to be a journalist, and I disliked it so much that I dropped it. But it's finally paid off, just a really roundabout way. They don't all break through, but when they do, they've drawn some really strong reactions. The one that I wrote on Zach Merritt, the way he went about the trade requests, went nuts. It's probably the thing that we've produced that's reached the most people in our 4 years of doing this. It is a bit awkward after what I wrote that he ended up staying, though. I don't think I'll be asking the club for an interview with Zach anytime soon, because yeah, I think I've burnt that bridge. There wasn't a bridge. It was a one-way conversation, but there's no chance of any bridges being built there now.
I think my favourite thing about your open letter to Zach Merritt is how many Hawthorn fans don't understand what an open letter was, and the number of people that replied to your social post saying, "Oh, he's not going to read it." Like, yeah, we know that was an open letter. It wasn't something that was put in the mail sent directly to Zach. But yeah, I actually love writing more than doing this side of content creation, to be honest with you. It's, yeah, I guess the introvert in me feels a little bit safer behind a keyboard or with a pen in my hand than a microphone. But yeah, our website's been our best performed channel of everything that we've done this year. And yeah, that letter, well, actually, it's probably the takedown hatchet job you did on Rowan Connolly, I think, that sort of started it all. His Archie Perkins is the biggest draft bust in AFL history sort of article. And then, you know, we picked apart Jay Clark, and it all sort of started to snowball from there. And yeah, I think the really great thing about, you know, your open letter to Zach Merritt, the one that I wrote about, you know, ultimately wanting to unite the old parts of Essendon and the new parts, and reclaim what that meant to be an old Essendon. Yeah, got such great feedback from, you know, the wider sort of Essendon community. We got messages from people actively at the club at the moment, and, you know, player managers and people all through the AFL community got around it and read it and gave some feedback. And yeah, that was really beautiful and overwhelming. So yeah, we'll continue writing stuff, because I think it's something that we clearly both enjoy.
Indeed. Look, it's been a long year of Don the Start. We had the countdown as well, so there's been a lot of opportunities for people to appear. So just want to thank everyone who appeared on Don the Stat this year. Obviously, Rick Edwards for his takes on pre-season training and his draft preview, and obviously he's really taken a step forward in his own content creation after having done so much for the Essendon community for so many years. And look, if you haven't already, make sure you sign up to his Patreon. It's been a fantastic extension of the work Rick's been doing, and it's definitely well worth your hard-earned with the extra stuff he's been putting there that's not out there on his socials. Thanks to Todd Davey from the Flight Pan, who joined me to talk about the trade period, become my Twitter Spaces partner in crime when we do go back to the old way of doing things, as Jono and I started with. So thanks to Todd there. Josh Wilson, one of our patrons, who actually filled in for you, Jono, in our Geelong preview when you had to take a flight overseas. Josh did a great job. He was fantastic with his own insights and the way in which he thought about the game. So again, thanks to Josh for stepping up there. Everyone, and of course, everyone who participated in the countdown leading up to round one, including, again, Rick Edwards, Todd Davey, Scott McNeese, Felix from Everything Essendon, Robert Shaw, Rowan Connolly, Ben Dunn, Jez from the Windy Hill Windsock, Charlie Dons, Rob from the Sash, Fiona from Bomber Banter, Bonds from the Big Footy Bombercast, your brother Andrew, and all the patrons that stepped up and helped with episodes when I put out the request to try and get some voices other than myself and Jono's there. There were some great tales. There were some great stories, and I shared, and it was a great opportunity to bring people together to reflect on Essendon history, even if I was completely exhausted by the end of it.
Yeah, it was a huge shift, mate. Also, thanks to Dean Wallace, who sent a pseudo-abusive text message and not at all happy with where he ranked in the top 100. But yeah, so be it. Yeah, thanks to everyone who's been on this year. A huge shout out from my end, well, from our end in particular, to Rick Edwards and Mike Reid. Rick for his regular appearances on the pod, and also the videos that he shares with me when I've got questions and queries about some things that are happening at training and otherwise. He continues to make a huge contribute to Don the Stat and definitely get behind the work that he's doing now with his own patron. It's well worth it. And he's building a great community over there as well. And Mike for all the work that he does to help us with data from the very basic to the very complex and at times some straight out bizarre requests that we make. We're really bloody lucky to have Mike in our corner helping us out. So yeah, huge thank you to you both.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with Mike. The database he's built for us is spectacular. And every time I do a terrible job explaining to him what I would like to see in terms of the data, he manages to decode it and put it into a format where I can easily see it. So a lot of the things that you guys may think that make us seem pretty smart, it all comes from sort of the background work that Mike does. Again, we're so lucky that he's willing to put in the time and effort to do that for us. He's as big a part of making this the show that it is as almost as we are. And again, we're really lucky to have him.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks also to my brother Andrew and to Robert Shaw for being constant confidants. Both people I can share my thoughts with, sort of sanity check and cross-reference. The support from both of them personally and what we do on the Stat means a lot to me. And then a huge thank you to you, Humie, of all the things that I've been able to experience in footy. And it's been a lot. This is most definitely the most enjoyable and the one that I'm most proud of. At times, my work means that on the Stat takes a back seat. And when it does, you pick up the slack. You put up with me being, disorganized and rushed and changing schedules at the last minute and travel schedules and everything else. So yeah, you do that all with a great level of patience and humility. And that's what makes you the incredible person that you are. I love sharing this ride with you, mate, and really grateful for what we've been able to achieve. And I can't wait to see what comes next.
Right back at you, Jono. Again, I think I've probably talked about this every year, but my background is not analysis. I don't have the same background as you, but the way in which you've basically coached me through it, and you've taken my ideas. You never really throw my ideas out the window. You're able to really bring me around to really reflect and consider my ideas in a lot more detail. And that means that when I start talking about it on the show, I don't come off as a blithering idiot. So I do thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Unless Taylor Giray is involved.
Yeah, exactly. I'm glad that's not going to be an issue next year. Yeah, look, yeah, you've said it all. It's hard to put into words what doing this with you means to me. Being able to chat with you every week is fantastic. It doesn't always go to plan with what we want to do, but we always manage to get a show out, and it always ends up being better than we expected. So yeah, I'm very glad we've had 4 years doing this show. I'm looking forward to at least 4 years more. Hopefully, at some stage we'll see an Essendon finals win and even more, because hopefully we're not a bad luck charm given Essendon haven't made finals since we started doing this show. It has to break sometime. Look, that's pretty much us wrapping up for the year. Unless something special occurs, we'll be back as per normal in late January as we do start to build up to that first game of the season. As always, Rick will join us to give his view on how training's progressing, put together our best 23s. We'll have our usual Patreon preseason Q&A episode, as well as in-depth breakdowns of all the practice games. And John has been working really hard on me. He's pretty close to convincing me to do another countdown in the lead up to round one. So keep an eye out for that. If it does happen, it's not going to be 100 episodes, thankfully, with Jono's idea. But if it does go ahead, it will be pretty exciting. And I think we're pretty close to be able to confirm that. So do keep your eyes out to our socials and to the feed. But look, I think that's enough from me. It's going to be quite nice to have a break over Christmas this year, unlike last year with the countdown. hopefully, listener, Santa brings you everything that you want, and you have a great time with your friends and family. Any final words from you, Jono?
I think, look, it's obviously been a big week with the events that we saw in Bondi on Sunday. It's a really sort of understandably scary and troubled time for people at the moment. So I think, within our little sphere of influence, just want to, wish everyone a really happy and safe Christmas. If you get the opportunity to take some time away and be with the people that you love, please go and do it. And if you don't and you need someone, then please reach out to those that are there to help you out. And, if you get the opportunity to be kind and put a smile on someone's face, then you never know who might need it. So please look after yourself and have the best Christmas you possibly can.
Well said, mate. Well, listeners, for the last time this year, stay safe, everyone, and go Dons.